Some fathers inspire their children. Mine treated me like a long-running comedy show. For as long as I could remember, every family gathering came with the same performance. It didn't matter whether it was a birthday, holiday dinner, wedding reception, or even a funeral. If there were at least 3 people standing together, my father somehow found a way to announce that his son wanted to become a lawyer. Then came the punchline. "Wanted to become a lawyer," he'd say while laughing. Past tense. The relatives would chuckle politely. Then he'd continue. "Have you ever seen someone study for 6 years and still look confused by a parking ticket?" More laughter. I usually smiled and let it happen. Fighting with him only encouraged him. The truth was that years earlier I had vanished from public law school so suddenly that everyone assumed I'd failed. Even my father never questioned it. In his mind, the case was closed. His son had chased a dream, crashed into a wall, and proven him right. What nobody knew was that I hadn't failed. I simply couldn't tell anyone where I had gone. The less people knew, the safer the investigation remained. Meanwhile, my father turned my supposed failure into his favorite hobby. At one family barbecue, he introduced me to a neighbor by saying, "This is my son. He wanted to defend innocent people in court. Now he mostly defends the potato salad from ants." The neighbor laughed so hard he nearly dropped his drink. I had to admit that one was actually funny. My girlfriend certainly thought so. She stood beside me, her silver eyes glowing with amusement as she stole a piece of grilled chicken from my plate. "You humans are strange," she said. "How so?" "My father challenged me to a ceremonial duel when I chose my career." "That sounds worse." "Yes, but at least it only happened once." I couldn't argue with that. She belonged to one of the most respected species within the Alliance. Brilliant, confident, and completely immune to my father's opinions, she viewed his constant jokes the way scientists observe unusual wildlife. Mostly with curiosity. Sometimes with concern. Occasionally with a desire to throw something at him. "What exactly is his goal?" she asked one evening after another family dinner. "He wants me to admit he was right. And then? Honestly, I don't think he's thought that far ahead." She laughed. The sound always made bad days easier. Unlike everyone else, she never measured people by their public success. She cared about integrity, effort, and character. The things that actually mattered. She believed in me long before anyone else did. Including my own family. Then came the property dispute. It started over a fence. A ridiculous fence. One section allegedly crossed the property line by less than 30 centimeters. What should have been a 5-minute conversation somehow evolved into legal complaints, angry neighbors, paperwork, and eventually a court hearing. My father loved every second of it. The moment he heard the case would be heard in court, he acted as though destiny had personally arranged the event for his entertainment. "Oh, this is perfect," he announced during a family dinner. I immediately recognized that smile. Whenever he wore that smile, trouble followed. "What's perfect?" I asked. "The courtroom." My girlfriend sighed. My father pointed at me dramatically. "You always wanted to be a lawyer. Here we go. Now you'll get front row seats to watch actual lawyers work." Several relatives burst out laughing. My girlfriend nearly choked on her drink. I simply shook my head. What my father didn't know was that the upcoming court appearance interested me for an entirely different reason. Over the past several months, my division had been tracking reports of suspicious legal activity throughout the district. Several names connected to the property dispute had already appeared in confidential files, including a few attorneys. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe it wasn't. Either way, I intended to find out. As my father continued celebrating what he expected would be my next public humiliation, I exchanged a glance with my girlfriend. She smiled knowingly. For the first time in years, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. The morning of the hearing felt strangely festive. Not because of the case. The case itself was ridiculous. 2 neighbors were arguing over a fence placement so minor that a measuring tape seemed more appropriate than a courtroom. Yet somehow dozens of documents, complaints, statements, and legal motions had accumulated around a strip of land barely wide enough for a garden hose. Still, the courthouse was crowded. Apparently, people loved drama when it wasn't their own. My father arrived looking as though he were attending an awards ceremony. He greeted everyone, shook hands, and somehow managed to turn a property dispute into an opportunity to discuss my life choices. I should have expected nothing less. "There he is," he announced when he spotted me entering the courtroom with my girlfriend. Several people turned. I immediately regretted showing up early. My father pointed toward me. "My son." The way he said it sounded less like an introduction and more like the opening line of a comedy routine. "The future lawyer." A few people laughed. "Former future lawyer," he corrected himself. More laughter. My girlfriend leaned toward me. "Do humans eventually run out of jokes?" "No. That's horrifying." I smiled. Unfortunately, my father wasn't finished. He approached a group of spectators and continued. "You know, when he was younger, he used to practice courtroom speeches in front of the mirror." I closed my eyes. The spectators looked interested. He'd point at the reflection and shout objections. One woman giggled. "Then what happened?" another asked. My father grinned. Reality. The group erupted with laughter. My girlfriend covered her face. "Please tell me he's embarrassed." "Not even slightly." Remarkable. The hearing hadn't even started, and he was already performing. The judge hadn't entered yet. Court officers were organizing files while attorneys reviewed documents at their tables. Most people paid attention to the property dispute. I paid attention to the attorneys. 3 of them immediately caught my eye. One kept checking the exits. Another was sweating despite the cool temperature. A third appeared unable to stop looking toward the courtroom entrance. Interesting. Very interesting. My girlfriend noticed my expression. "You see something?" "Maybe." "Good maybe or bad maybe?" "Depends on who you ask." She nodded. After years together, she knew better than to push when I used that tone. Across the room, my father had somehow gained an audience. Again. He stood among several spectators explaining how difficult it was to raise a son who wanted to become a lawyer. I wasn't sure whether to laugh or be offended. Probably both. "Maybe the judge will let him argue today," my father joked loudly. Several people laughed. "He can finally experience losing in court." Even more laughter followed. I simply sat down and folded my hands. The easiest way to defeat people like my father was patience. Sooner or later, they created their own problems. As the room settled, I noticed 2 court officers quietly exchanging glances. One nodded toward a side door. A moment later, an unfamiliar official entered carrying a sealed folder. Not unusual by itself. Except the officer receiving it immediately became serious. The folder changed hands twice before reaching the judge's clerk. That was unusual. Very unusual. My girlfriend followed my gaze. "The maybe just became something?" I nodded slightly. "I think so." The judge entered moments later. Everyone stood. The hearing officially began. My father looked pleased with himself. The spectators looked entertained. The attorneys looked nervous. And when the judge opened the sealed folder that had just arrived, I watched his expression change completely. The smile vanished from his face. The room suddenly felt much smaller. Something was about to happen. Something none of them were expecting. The judge stared at the sealed documents for several long seconds. The entire courtroom waited. Even my father finally stopped talking. That alone should have warned everyone that something unusual was happening. The judge finished reading, closed the folder carefully, and looked toward the court officers. His voice was calm. Far too calm. "Lock the doors." For a moment nobody reacted. Several spectators exchanged confused glances. Then the court officers immediately moved into position. Heavy security doors clicked shut. The sound echoed throughout the courtroom. The atmosphere changed instantly. My father's smile disappeared. The nervous attorneys became even more nervous. One of them actually started sweating so heavily that I wondered if he was trying to break some kind of medical record. The judge adjusted his glasses. Before we proceed with today's scheduled hearing, this court has received authorization to conduct an emergency disciplinary investigation involving multiple legal professionals operating within this district. Silence. Absolute silence. Then chaos began. One attorney suddenly stood. There must be some mistake. The judge wasn't interested. Sit down. The attorney sat down so quickly that his chair nearly tipped over. My girlfriend squeezed my hand beneath the table. I could already see the questions forming in her mind. She knew what was coming. She just didn't know how dramatic it would become. The judge continued. Evidence has been presented regarding fraudulent legal credentials, falsified court filings, and unauthorized legal representation. Several attorneys turned pale. One looked as though he might faint. Another quietly began reaching for his briefcase. A court officer immediately stepped beside him. The briefcase remained closed. Smart decision. My father looked around in confusion. For the first time all day, he wasn't the center of attention. The judge opened another document. Lead investigator, please stand. That was my cue. I rose from my chair. The courtroom collectively blinked. My father blinked twice. Then a third time. His expression suggested that his brain had completely stopped functioning. The judge nodded toward me. Please present your credentials. I reached inside my jacket and removed my identification. The official insignia of the Alliance Legal Integrity Division appeared on the display screen. Gasps filled the room. Several spectators nearly fell out of their seats. One woman actually dropped her phone. My father looked from the screen to me and back again. Then back to the screen. Then back to me. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. Apparently words had abandoned him. The judge continued speaking. This investigator has spent the last 3 years leading an operation targeting fraudulent attorneys throughout multiple systems. The room exploded with whispers. 3 years. 3 entire years. While my father had been telling jokes about my failed legal career, I had been building cases against some of the most sophisticated legal fraud networks in the region. My girlfriend looked ridiculously pleased. I suspected she had been waiting years for this exact moment. Then things became even funnier. One of the attorneys suddenly stood up. I demand legal representation. The judge stared at him. You are a lawyer. The man froze. Realization hit him. The courtroom erupted with laughter. Even the judge struggled not to smile. Another attorney attempted to explain why several forged licenses had somehow appeared under his name. Unfortunately, his explanation accidentally confirmed 3 separate criminal violations. A court officer immediately wrote everything down. Perhaps you'd like to repeat that statement? The judge asked. The attorney's face turned white. Meanwhile, my father looked as though he had just discovered that gravity was optional. He slowly sank into his chair. A few spectators recognized him from his earlier performance. One leaned over and whispered something. Another started laughing. The father who had spent all morning mocking his son for failing as a lawyer was now discovering that his son had never failed at all. In fact, he had been the person investigating half the room. And judging by the terrified faces around me, the investigation was far from over. The disciplinary hearings continued for weeks. What began as a ridiculous argument over a fence eventually uncovered one of the largest legal fraud operations in the district's history. Several fake attorneys lost their licenses. Others discovered that pretending to be qualified professionals was considerably less enjoyable when investigators arrived with evidence. The judge later described the operation as a major victory for both human and alien citizens throughout the Alliance. I was simply happy the work had helped people. Unfortunately for my father, the public had developed a different favorite part of the story. His reaction. Someone in the courtroom had recorded the exact moment my credentials appeared on the screen. The image spread everywhere. One frame showed my father smiling confidently. The next showed him looking as though his soul had attempted an emergency evacuation. It became a local legend. People loved it. My father did not. A week later, we attended a family gathering. Normally, these events involved him telling embarrassing stories about me. This time the roles had reversed. The moment we entered the house, my uncle burst out laughing. "Hey, have the doors been locked?" The room exploded with laughter. My father groaned. Another relative asked if anyone had checked for undercover investigators. More laughter followed. For years I had been the family joke. Now everyone had new material. My girlfriend enjoyed every second of it. She sat beside me wearing the kind of smile usually associated with victorious generals. "I may frame that photograph," she said. My father pointed at her. "Don't encourage them." "I'm absolutely encouraging them." The room laughed again. To his credit, he accepted it better than I expected. A few days later he asked to meet privately. For the first time in my life, he seemed genuinely nervous. He sat quietly for several moments before speaking. "I owe you an apology." I said nothing. "I spent years making jokes because I thought I understood your life." He shook his head. "Turns out I didn't understand anything." The honesty surprised me. "I should have respected you whether you succeeded or failed." I looked at him for a long moment. Those were words I never expected to hear. Finally, I nodded. That's all I ever wanted. The tension that had existed between us for years seemed to disappear. Not instantly. Not magically. But enough. People can change when they're willing to admit they're wrong. Even stubborn fathers. Months later, the investigation officially concluded. Awards were presented. Commendations were issued. Several communities thanked our division for protecting citizens from fraudulent legal representation. My girlfriend attended every ceremony. She claimed someone needed to make sure I didn't become arrogant. "That's your father's department," I reminded her. She laughed. "True. Though his confidence has suffered significant damage." The wedding planning started shortly afterward. That announcement created another round of celebrations. My father insisted on introducing me to every guest. This proved to be a mistake. "This is my son," he would proudly begin. Then someone would interrupt. "The investigator?" Another person would add. "The courtroom guy?" A third would ask. "Were you there when the judge said lock the doors?" The laughter always started immediately. Every single time. My father never escaped it. At our engagement celebration, one guest even brought a decorative sign that read, "Lock the doors." The entire room nearly collapsed from laughter. Even my father eventually joined in. As I watched him laughing alongside everyone else, I realized something important. Success wasn't proving him wrong. Success wasn't exposing criminals. Success wasn't even earning recognition. Success was building a life with people who believed in me, standing beside the woman I loved, and knowing I had stayed true to my principles despite years of ridicule. My father had spent years convinced I would never become a lawyer. In the end, I became something far more valuable. And every time someone repeated the story of the courtroom, the locked doors, and the expression on my father's face, I couldn't help smiling. Because some lessons take years to learn. And some punchlines are worth the wait.